There can be so many beautiful messages that just get lost in translation, lost in the rabbit trail. And that is really my favorite sweet spot is helping people find their voice and get some of those obstacles out of the way so that their message can actually land and be very memorable. And honestly, though, like we all remember Mona Lisa, we all remember art. And so if your message can be accompanied by a visual, no matter what it is, it's just a game changer.
Welcome back to the Be Unbound podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Brush, along with our producer and co-host and all things technical man, David Rethemeyer, who we have worked really hard to make this episode work. And we're waiting with bated breath to see if it will work because it didn't yesterday, David. And so second time's a charm. And we'll see if we can get our guest, Sarah Shaw, on here and working today. Sarah is an Unbound alum. We're going to introduce you to her in a second, and we'll look forward to doing that. But Sarah does many things. If you've ever heard me speak, there's a fair chance that you saw a slide deck designed by Sarah. And if you've read our book, which is The Personal Triangle, or if you're going to read in the future our upcoming book about the team triangle, those books were illustrated by Sarah. She is a absolutely fantastic illustrator and graphic designer and visual artist. And her website and her company is Inclivity. The website is inclivity.com. And on it says, Illustrating the Invisible. This is a place where ideas get a makeover. And that is correct. She is really good at communicating ideas visually. So we're excited to introduce you to her. David, any other thoughts before we start this conversation?
Yeah. And I think just not only is Sarah just incredibly skilled in just a wide and fascinating variety of areas and expertise that she has, but just whenever I have a conversation with Sarah at any of our Unbound events, I always feel very at home and very comfortable talking with her, even though she probably has way more expertise and knowledge about the vast majority of things that we end up talking about. It's just always feels very welcoming. And it also just leaves me coming away with a new perspective or a new way of looking at any particular thing that we might be talking about. So yeah, like you've said, I think that we are going to be very much looking forward to having a lot of episodes with Sarah, but I think this is a great one to start on.
Well, with that, let's get to our conversation with Sarah Shaw of Inclivity. Sarah, welcome to the Be Unbound podcast. And first of all, as three of us know, it's been a struggle getting here technologically, not because Sarah's a problem and not because David doesn't have technological skills, but because the technological powers that be that we don't really fully understand hated us. And so we're now on day 2 of trying to get this. And so we're really glad to have this thing all working. There's also a bit of a tragedy here, Sarah, because honestly, if you and I had recorded half the conversations we've had over the last however many years, we'd have like 8 seasons of some really
For sure.
interesting podcast episodes. And so I think on the last time we had a conversation, I was like, why don't you just come on the podcast and let's get something out of this. So looking forward to our conversation today. But it is my pleasure and honor to introduce Sarah Shaw. She is an Unbound alum, so that makes us cool. I don't know how cool it makes Sarah, but it certainly makes us cool. And a longtime colleague on multiple projects, one of the most talented graphic designers I know, and somebody who is absolutely phenomenal at taking ideas and turning them into images. Now, I'm big on ideas and like images, but have no ability to bridge the two. Like stick figures are the entire top of my graphic ability as far as I've ever gotten. And so what Sarah does to me looks almost magical. And it's not just the fact that she's a talented graphic designer, it's the thinking that goes behind the images that is really interesting. In addition to that, we could go on for a long time about all the other interesting skill sets that Sarah has. But Sarah, welcome to the Be Unbound podcast. We're really glad that you're here.
Oh, thank you. It's so weird. It's just a phone call, but
That's
slight
right.
upgrade.
Yeah, it's a phone call with recording. That's the problem. So,
Exactly.
yeah, that might be the other side of those conversations might have been great if they were edited. There might have been some rabbit trails that we are kind of glad aren't recorded, perhaps as well. So,
Yeah.
well, Sarah, first of all, just tell me a little bit about your journey because you've had an interesting professional career. And when I say interesting, sometimes people say that and it's like, well, it's interesting. No, I mean it in a very positive sense. You have a wide variety of skill sets in a couple of different areas. You have had a bit of a graphic design thread that's gone through that, but that's only
Mhm.
recently sort of manifested itself little more seriously. And we'll talk about your latest project here in a minute. But just give us a little bit of your story, say from Unbound on, or if you want to start earlier, do so.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I will start earlier because I think the
Great.
context, even I just recently started piecing some of this together. So I, about up to age 6, lived in Florida. And the reason that's significant is I lived in a family that was enamored with Disney. So all the movies that we watched were Pixar, Disney. There were a few other exceptions, but was just really saturated in the visual creativity. And it's funny because at like 3 or 4, I would get mad doing coloring books because I would watch a movie and watch a scene and I'm like, I could picture it perfectly in my head, rearrange the scene, I go to color and my hand would scribble outside the line. I'd be so mad. And so at 3 or 4, I remember seeing a picture of the Sistine Chapel and being like, that's the standard. I was too extra, honestly. And so I would get mad, and I actually thought I wasn't creative at all as a kid because I just saw the bar. I was like, that is the bar. And since I can't match it, obviously I'm failing. But I was still kind of curious. So I would still work really hard at creative projects in Sunday school or school. Again, if someone had come up to me and been like, are you creative? I would have said no. I did sports. That was sort of the thing I was actually known for. And then the background was just me being mad that I couldn't make really pretty things, but still showed up for art classes and stuff. And it wasn't until about, I think I was like 14, and I started doing classes with this phenomenal art teacher, Robert Caldwell. And he bumped me up to the adult classes. And that was the first time someone sat me down and did like fine art training and technique. Because before all that was there was sort of this, I mean, I guess you could call it grit in a way because it wasn't like they weren't terrible pieces of art, but there was nothing that was like, this girl's going to be good. It was just sort of, I was annoyed. I wanted to make good stuff. I couldn't, but I kept going anyway. And this art teacher slowed me down, took me through more of like a fine art process. And so I actually thought at like 15 or 16, I was like, maybe I'll go to art school. This is actually going to be a thing. I could actually pull this off. And he was the first one that said, hey, you shouldn't go get an art degree. So I was like, this is really interesting because you'd gone to art school and stuff. And he's like, you should get a business degree because you can teach yourself art. He's like, I see how your brain works. I see how you think. You can teach yourself art. You're not going to be able to teach yourself business, which was a very interesting compliment, not compliment, but so honest. He's like, you have a creative mind. A spreadsheet is not going to be intuitive. This is not going to go well. And so that planted a seed because at 16, I actually developed a tendonitis in my writing hand, had to drop out of school. That's a whole other story. But drop out of school, drop out of sports, drop out of all creative stuff. Everything went up in the attic. And I felt very derailed and was kind of like, I guess maybe I shouldn't do art because my hand is falling apart. And I didn't have good theology at the time either. So I was like, this must mean because I got injured, God doesn't want me to do art. So everything went in the attic. But flash forward to end of high school, what the heck am I going to do with myself? I had a lot of different health issues going on, but I had that nagging comment from this art teacher. It was like, you should get a business degree. And we had heard about Unbound College Plus, the good old days. And that was the thing. I'm like, can I get a business degree here? I had no plan. I was just like, this is what my art teacher said, and I respect him. And who knows what the heck is going to happen to me or with me. And so enrolled, and that's how I kind of came into College Plus slash now, of course, Unbound. Was pretty beat up, not sure what the heck to do with my creativity. Just sort of like, this is the next step. Not sure what else to do. And started coming to student life events, which Jonathan, you get credit for because you came to Richmond and gave a talk to a total of like 10 people
Yep.
in this auditorium. And you're like, there's
That your
this
mom
cool
set
thing.
up, right? Yep.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, I didn't want to go. I didn't want to go. She's like, this guy's cool. And I was like, sure. And I'm just, and it wasn't until you started talking about like French fries that I was like, okay, he's interesting. And he seems competent enough that if I go to this weird Apex thing, if the whole thing goes like up in flames, he can call 911. He seems competent. That was literally the logic of it because I didn't know anybody else in Unbound.
Well, then I have to flip the table here and say that, when I first met Sarah, it was sitting at a picnic table at a camp that we'll never return to in Texas. And I said, how's it going? And she's like, let me tell you.
You
And
did?
it was not a complimentary assessment that followed after that, but it was honest and it was correct. It was accurate. And I
Yeah.
walked away from that going, "Yeah, that wasn't the most fun conversation I've had, but all the things that she criticized are all wrong." Like that I can't fault her for any of those, and we became a lot better because of that, because I went back to the team and said,
Oh,
"Well, we got a few problems." that one of our students pointed out, and, yeah, so hopefully we've not made those mistakes again, so
that was so funny. Yeah, and it overall still was a good experience because I came back. It wasn't too traumatizing.
you should know that Sarah's never had a problem getting to events. Sarah's leaving events. The amount of
Listen.
times Sarah's ride off after the event has fallen through, I think she just loves us a lot and never wants to leave. But normally, no problems getting Sarah to an event. Getting Sarah home is generally a massive undertaking. So
Mhm. It's impressive. It's
yeah.
impressive at this point. But, yeah, so started coming to Apex, and then I'm a little fuzzy on timeline, Baltimore, and Gap was a big turning point. I don't know if you've mentioned that to students as an event too
No,
much or
there was a what ended up being a one-time event, and we've talked for years about doing it again, but, boy, I don't remember, 2016 or 2017, something like
Mhm.
that. We did something called the Great Art Project, and we discovered that we had a lot of artists of various kinds in our student body, but a lot of people trying to figure out what did their art mean and what did their creative skills mean. And so we got a group of what, about 30, 40 students, maybe
Something
30
like that.
students, probably like
Yeah.
that, and a couple, 40, so some with us with staff and some others, and some volunteers we had help us. And we rented a really interesting house in the middle of the Smoky Mountains. And this was right after an enormous wildfire came through.
Mhm.
In fact, my brother in law was vacationing in that area. And I was calling him and saying, "You need to check because I've paid a lot of money to rent this house. And we're supposed to bring a group down there. And I don't know if it's still there." And he drove out, and it was the only house standing on the road.
It was
So when we
crazy.
got there, literally, this house was untouched and everything else was burnt to really nothing. I've never quite seen such utter devastation from fire. And so we had this really interesting experience where we had a bunch of artists in the one untouched house looking out over a gorgeous valley of trees, surrounded by devastation, burnt houses and burnt trees. And it turned into this amazing week of conversations and art in a couple of different mediums. We had visual arts and we had video and writing. And yeah, and there was the implications and the repercussions from that event are still echoing through. I'd like to think the world, but at least our community in terms of some of those things. And so, yeah, Sarah, that's the background for the event. And I pick up your story there.
Mhm. Oh, yeah. No, and so I honestly, since developing the tendinitis at about 16 years old, that was the first time I ever re-engaged with creativity. I had been too nervous. My hand had gotten better at that point, but I mean, just kinda jaded. Like, I don't know how many people have watched Cars, Pixar movie, but I had a
Yeah.
very Doc Hudson, like, jaded type of energy going into it. Like, I'm not touching racing again. I'm not touching art. But for some reason I went. I was like, just again, that whatever I maybe need to start calling this grit, that like angst of just like, I care about this. I want to be able to re-engage with it, kicked back in and showed up. And it what just was like a total restart, restarted the engine, restarted imagining. And I had the idea of doing a film project afterward, called, and I think we called it Lumiere Studios or something. And basically, we were going to do this film project at Apex. It turned into a logistical nightmare,
It
and
did.
it did not come to fruition. But what's really interesting is in the midst of all that chaos, I was like, I need a way of explaining whatever the heck is happening to people. I just explained it to my team. And so I went on Canva and designed this like explanation of the different teams. And it was this graphic. And that was actually the first time I had ever touched graphic design. I had never had
I didn't know
anything to
that.
do with it.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the film project bombed and I was bummed. It didn't really bomb, right? This is how your thing of failure, right? It's like you learn.
Right.
I didn't want to fail again because high school had been so traumatizing. I was like, I just want something to work. But in hindsight, what's really fascinating, and I also have other friendships that popped up out of that, just people in the community I got to know at a different level. Rachel Kimsey, shout out if you listen to this. We're friends because of that and different things, but that's actually where graphic design started. And so even the motivation was here's this chaos, here's this stuff that people are not getting through email, through Slack messages, and not because they're dumb, but because a lot of us really do better with visual. And that's not a slam. I think we are visual creatures. And so honestly, it's kind of funny to look now at what I'm doing, zooming ahead several years, and I'll fill in a few more gaps because I think it does make the story. You said, career path has been interesting, and that is a very fair word. It feels like one of those Charles Dickens books where you're like, where is this plot line going? This is so random at this point. Like, what are we doing? But yeah, graphic design started as actually doing these little side projects in Unbound. I think there was like an SLI book, Student Leadership
Yes.
Initiative book that went
Mm-hmm.
out. And at some point, you took a chance on me, and I think it was, what were they called? Engagements?
Yes.
Jonathan, do you remember this? And it was like a
Yes.
relationship
Yeah, you
something.
built a whole series of slide decks on
Yeah.
relationships, friendships, and relationships, and communication and relationship
Mhm.
problems, all those things. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. And
And there was
so
like a seven or eight presentations, so slide decks for all those, and Sarah created all the slides for those. But this is where Sarah's different. Like you can hire people to create slides, but what Sarah brought to it was not just a visual way of representing, not just creating nice looking slides. In the process of creating slides, I would get notes back to say this point doesn't make sense, or this, have you thought about organizing it this
Mhm.
way, or there's an opportunity to add in content here that I think would help illustrate this point. And so it was kind of like a digital or an image consultant who was both doing images that were enhancing the stories and the points I was trying to make, but also organizing them. And for me, super helpful because I could organize in my head verbally, but am
Mhm.
not particularly good at organizing visually. And, as a speaker, the power that happens when the slides that you're presenting are visually enhancing and backing up the story you're telling, it transforms a presentation. And
Mhm.
in working with Sarah, I've been lucky to work with blessed to work with some really cool designers, both inside and outside of Unbound. But Sarah set this amazing standard of not just creating attractive slides, but creating attractive slides that enhance the story, and in the process, making the story and the presentation better. So yeah, I remember those Engage events as the first of now a series of presentations that you've designed for us.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting to me to just see that like back end piece. Cause when I was first doing graphic design, like talk about the idea of like developing a business. When I first graduated school, I kind of tried and it was called Red Boot Studios and I could make things pretty, don't get me wrong. And I was actually still doing what you were talking about, but I didn't value that skill set at all. I didn't even recognize it as a particularly unique skill because even when I was just a kid, I am so visual that I would hear a lesson and it might be like a math lesson or science, and I would turn it into a picture in my head like a live animated movie and watch it. And that's how I taught myself things. And I would learn. And so when I would listen to TED Talks, same thing, turn it into this metaphor, watch it as the person is talking. And I'm like, cool, I get it now. And I didn't know other people didn't do that. It took like talking to a few friends and kind of explaining it where they're like, yeah, that's not
Mhm.
normal. And I was like, "Oh, that's not normal." And I think and I mean, something else I've thought about too is I heard one of my favorite kind of thought leaders, he's a pastor as well. His name is Darius Daniels. And he said to actually, I'm going to totally butcher the quote, but I'm going to get the principle of it. Like, pay attention to what irritates you because that could actually be like a source of calling or something for you to attend to. And so, honestly, something that irritated me for years was listening to people. Jonathan, you were like pretty good at this. You're such a storyteller. I could watch you sometimes talk before we do slide decks and be like, oh, little rabbit trail. Oh, I'll bring it back and stuff. But it was mostly watching, sometimes it'd be watching TED Talks or sermons or just be at conferences. And I would be listening to the person on stage. I'd be like, I get it because I had to translate everything you said into a picture in my head. But I'd watch everybody else or I'd talk to them afterward and I could see the message didn't hit. And I was like, oh, we're having a translation issue. As well as sometimes speakers will have slide decks that don't complement their personality or their style, and they can kind of look like a fish out of water. Like, okay, that's pretty, but that's not you, or it doesn't fit their audience very well. And so I think I just got irritated by like, oh my gosh, there can be so many beautiful messages that just get lost in translation, lost in the rabbit trail. And over time, I think that is what I have really tried to have be kind of my It's like I do graphic design. I do graphic design, but that is really my favorite sweet spot is kind of helping people find their voice and get some of those obstacles out of the way so that their message can actually land and be very memorable. That's the other thing. The visuals, especially if you're talking, I mean, you deal with college student age and everything, and people pick on the younger generation, be like, they just have a low attention span and yada, yada, yada. And you got to entertain them with flashy things. And it's like, honestly, though, we, we all remember Mona Lisa, we all remember art. And so if your message can be accompanied by a visual, no matter what it is, it's just a game changer.
I agree. And Sarah, you don't have to go into this a lot, but Sarah's it's not just the design aspect of it, but this is the part where I find is interesting is that when we talk about things in the world, when we talk about careers, what particularly when we talk about it in normal terms through an educational perspective, it's about skills. It's about learning
Mhm.
skills. And so you have a lot of skill credential stuff that's going on. And so I get frustrated with this. I have people that, what do you want to do? And they state a particular position at a company. I want to be
Mm,
a specific career. And then they think that there's a set of credentials and a set of boxes to check really to learn that. And then when I apply those skills to that career, then I will get these results. Now, there's a couple problems wrong with that. One is it's often not true anymore. When you
mm,
live in a world full of technological change, those skills become outdated really quickly. And so it turns out that your ability to learn new skills is far more important than your ability to know those skills in the first place, because whatever skills you know are likely to be eclipsed pretty quickly by the technological change that you're going to face. So that's the start of it. The second part is that to be really good at something, it's not just understanding how to do it, you have to understand how it works. And
mhm,
so a quick example is I like to work with wood. I don't think I would characterize myself as an expert wood worker, but I've done enough of it to have an appreciation for it. And the reason that I can tell the difference between that is that it is not particularly difficult to understand how to learn to run a bandsaw, a circular saw, use a biscuit maker, do joints, and put together and understand the principles of woodworking. Right,
mhm,
that's a set of
mhm,
skills that are relatively quick to acquire, and it doesn't take a particular innate skill set. But the difference between that and a woodworker is a woodworker has an instinctive and deep understanding of the material, of how wood moves because of moisture, of what grain patterns do, of which way the grain runs, of why a tool cuts in the way that it does, and is able to sort of look beyond and underneath the surface of something and pull out the characteristics of that organic piece of material, that wood, and
mhm,
then craft it into what they're making. So that and you can if you don't know that, you can still see the results. Somebody can run a table
mhm,
saw, can put together a bench. Somebody who's a woodworking can put together a bench. There will be a startling and noticeable difference between the two
mhm,
because of that additional understanding. So I use it as an example because Sarah is a graphic designer, but a graphic designer who has some unique background. So you talked about the failure and things of that nature. But Sarah, you're a graphic designer who has an advanced degree that's not in graphic design, but I
no,
think is really tied closely to what you actually do in graphic design. So yeah, take us
mhm,
down a quick strip on what your actual graduate work is in and
yeah.
why it's not immediately obvious why it helps you with what you do, but in fact, I think makes a tremendous difference and you're able to do the work that you do. So
Yeah, yeah. Oh, and just real quick to circle back, the degree I did get undergrad was organizational leadership. So
right.
I did end up getting that business degree. And this does feed into the master's because organizational leadership is just people skill. It is change. It is the people side of business. I literally did not have to do accounting too. And that was why that happened.
I'm
So,
jealous, so
I
jealous.
know. I bailed. I did. I got through accounting 1 and I was like, "Nah, this is the same degree. I'm just gonna transfer 90 credits here, 90 credits there, and call this a day. No accounting 2." So, yeah, but so during the pandemic quarantine, I had graduated with that organizational leadership degree in 2019 and then had struggled just kind of bouncing around a lot of different jobs and everything. I was nannying. At some point, you talk about interesting, I worked for like a Ukrainian tile guy and did bathrooms and worked the water saw and we did outdoor patios. So I did that for a few weeks. So I could also tile your bathroom. You're welcome. So random. And
But it would look good. I
it
mean,
would look
the
good.
tiles would go up in a design that was really cool. So,
It look really good. I have some harsh words for marble, but I digress. So, oh my gosh. But yeah, so I was dating, doing that. I was still doing graphic design projects. And it's interesting because back then I was like, my life feels like kind of a hot mess. What is going on? But it was actually that patchwork that fed being in quarantine. I decided to go get a master's in clinical mental health counseling, which for people that don't know, I didn't know hardly how I knew I wanted to be a therapist. I had had families I was just dating for be like, "Hey, you're good with kids. Have you thought about this?" And I was like, "No, we're not doing that. No, I'll never." And then quarantine hit, and I was like, "Oh, okay. I guess what else am I gonna do?" So I started that in August of 2020 and did Liberty Online. They had their system set up, and so it wasn't too much of a jolt. And I was like, well, I already did school online once. Everybody else over there was like, we're here because of the pandemic. And I'm like, I'm here because I've already been here. So we're this is fine. This
got
is
this.
totally
Yep.
fine.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, and I finished that up last December. So it's December of 22. And I literally is funny. Yeah, I finished last Christmas and it was a rough experience. Got the degree done, but was kind of like, huh, there's some interesting ways that we handle mental health. That again, Jonathan, you mentioned us having other podcasts and like that might be where that rabbit trail goes. But long story short, I graduated in December, February hit, and I was like, this is not working. This is not a good fit. And I didn't realize I was doing this, but I basically put in I quit counseling on Valentine's Day. I broke up with it on Valentine's Day, which I literally didn't plan. I didn't think about. I just was like, oh, I put in my 1 month notice on Valentine's Day. That's funny. And then after that, mid March started a marketing job for a nonprofit here and had just kind of a crazy summer, crazy experience, a lot of different interesting life events. And one of the main ones being I tore my ACL over the summer and needed surgery and was basically spent the month of September home just thinking. And I was like, I've done a lot more graphic design projects. I've got this degree under my belt. I've got more of an articulation about what I care about. And so, what if I could really try? I was a little nervous because I was like, I had tried to do a design business before the Red Boot Studios thing, but I hadn't honed really what the skill set was that I brought. And then it's different now talking with people about their projects because, like I said, I logged probably, in addition to working, easily logged over 1,000 hours of counseling with folks. And I'm kind of like, if I can get through a conversation with somebody that's high, like schizophrenic off their meds, this. I was like, I think I can do this. I was like, I got this with this.
I can handle a client.
I can handle a client. We
That's
can
honestly
do
what it
this.
feels like talking with some clients half the time. I
Yeah.
understand.
Right after that, she came back and did some work for us. What does that say about us, David? So,
I was
Oh.
like, oh, cracked my knuckles. Like I figured out what all the issues are. No, I'm kidding. Oh,
it's like, oh, this is what these guys' problem is. So,
exactly. Oh my gosh. But no, I did study more about like creativity and I just in doing that degree too, I feel like my empathy has grown a lot too for both speakers and people trying to communicate messages as well as some of the dynamics of an audience that can be really frustrating. And so, yeah, I use that degree every day when I'm doing, and it's not just, I mean, there can be the cliche of like, haha, you're more skilled at dealing with crazy people. And it's like, it's not really that simple. The other thing that I have found very fascinating since doing the degree and just watching, because everything, like, I learned how to kind of unpack my life, unpack my story, understand, like, I have a much deeper understanding of even why I care about what I care about. Yes, there's the creative skills, but more of what that deeper drive is. And I've noticed with a lot of folks that are passionate about whatever their idea is, a common pitfall is there's a big disconnect and they don't know why they're so passionate. And so another piece I do when I'm talking with people is it's like, it's a fine line, right? Because what I'm not doing is I'm not practicing therapy and graphic design. So you come to me, you're like, what's working with PowerPoint? And then you're like, actually, I need help with my dad issues. That's not what we're doing. That's not what we're doing. I'm not licensed for that. I'm not trying to get sued for anything
Just
like
to be
that.
clear, in case you're
Yes.
thinking about it, don't come to say with your problems unless they can be solved visually. So
But I do help people more deeply connect with what their talk is about and what they're passionate about. Because sometimes what can happen, and I've seen some sessions like this, you can sometimes, and Jonathan, you have never done this, so don't worry, this is not a backhanded anything. I have seen speakers at different conferences kind of almost have a low grade, high functioning meltdown on stage. We'll call it that, where you can tell it's almost like they've gotten it's too emotional to a certain degree. It's like kind of off the rails. It got too personal. Something happened. And they often also look blindsided by it. Like it wasn't their intention to get up there and kind of feel overwhelmed and kind of be like, oh my gosh, that thing didn't go very well. Like it's got to be one of the worst feelings ever, right? It's like you don't mean for that to happen. But I've noticed working with clients and stuff when they have a better sense of where they are in their idea or what, like almost like where's their emotional connection to it, they're less likely to suddenly get blindsided when they're teaching it or when they're speaking it. Or if someone pushes back on it in a very particular zone, they're less likely to be so defensive. And they can kind of keep the idea, the focus, as opposed to, oh my gosh, I'm up there. I'm the one, it's like they get too personally connected with it and they can't separate out. This is my idea and this is me. And then, I mean, I'm really curious what you think about that, Jonathan, because you've worked in the world of ideas and thoughts. And that seems to be an area people get pretty enmeshed and then it causes some trouble.
well, there's probably 3 more podcasts there, so we'll only skip across it. But it's really interesting. Last night I taught the last session of our Navigate course, and so we teach a course on decision making, and some of it's delivered online, and then I teach at least 2 live sessions, including the final concluding session. And one of the things we talk about there is something called the personal triangle, and you've heard about us talk about that before in the introduction, and obviously Sarah plays a big role in that. But the personal triangle we say is connected through excuse me, the team triangle is connected through culture and conflict. And we say that culture only is created through conflict. And so I mentioned that, and we teach that in depth, those concepts in depth in a couple of different places, but we sort of intro in the Navigate course. And so a student asked last night, and she said, like, help me think through this conflict thing. Because what we tell students is that if you are on a team and there isn't conflict, that's actually a really bad sign, because you will not be able to then create culture. And culture is what ultimately helps the team work together in a way that achieves more than they think is possible. And so you need some conflict, but of course it has to be constructive conflict, not destructive conflict. And so she was asking, well, what's the difference in those two? And Sarah, to your point, I said constructive conflict is when you're having conflict over the best idea. It's when everybody is so determined to get to the place that everybody's agreed that they have to go, that they're willing to fight for their ideas that they think are the best to get them there. But that is all in the context of we're all trying to go the same place, and we're trying to find the best way to get there, not to get there because I'm only going to take my way. And the example I use is if, Sarah, you say, I think we should go this way. And I say, that's a stupid, idiotic idea. Well, now you'll fight to the death for that idea, because it's not the idea that I criticized, it was you. And there's a defensive part of you that says, I don't care. At this point, I don't care if the idea takes us and augers us into the ground and destroys the whole thing. I'm not going to let that idiot get his idea to go across. And I say that as somebody who's been the person that's been that irrational. Like I now personally don't like this person. I don't care if the whole thing burns as long as that guy's idea doesn't get through. I mean, I'm guilty, right? I mean, I've done stupid stuff like that. The difference is when you can kind of pull that apart and say, I'm going to fight to the death over this idea, but only because I want the best idea. I want to get this thing in the arena and have it compare against everybody else's, and then I'm not personally involved in compete with you. I'm competing against these ideas so the best one wins, so that we then all gain as we head to this place that we're all going together. And that's where some really interesting leadership takes place. And Sarah, kind of to loop it around to what you do, that's where often people can visualize that better than they can hear it. So when somebody's talking about things, there's a real intimate connection between somebody's voice and that person, and so and somebody's ear in that person, and so there's a visual connection, and it's hard to separate the person from the idea. But when somebody can take an idea and visually represent it, now you can look at something that's outside. It's not personal. You're looking at a piece of
Mhm.
paper or you're looking at a screen. And now you get some objectivity and some subjectivity, both of which are necessary, right? And a different perspective on that idea. And now all of a sudden you're going, oh, okay, wait, I see this. I see something I didn't see before. And I think that's where what Sarah does is so powerful. And just to make sure we mentioned it in the introduction and we'll mention it again here at the end, but Sarah is now working and runs her business called Inclivity,
Mhm.
INKLIV, excuse me, LIVITY,
Mhm.
inclivity.com. And if you get
Mhm.
any close version of Inclivity typed into Google, you'll hit it. And your tagline is illustrating the invisible. This is a place where ideas get a makeover. And
Mhm.
I think that there's some really important stuff there. So if you're a speaker or if you want something visually represented, definitely talk to Sarah. But for this podcast, I want you all to sort of think about some of the things that Sarah's saying here. And just as a quick recap, think about the way Sarah got to where she is now. I think she's uniquely, unusually skilled at what she does. But she did not get skilled in what she does by punching a bunch of tickets and getting credentials for those things. She owns
Mhm.
no credentials related to the work she's actually doing. Yet she owns very powerful credentials and has had very powerful educational experiences and work experiences that have all worked to make what she does exceptional. And I would say even extraordinary, that she does it in a way that other people don't because of that broad variety of experiences. I think by definition, most people are going to have that just practically. That's the way the world works now. But there's a big difference if you're kicking and screaming your way through that, or you see this as opportunities. And Sarah, you laughed and joked about kicking and screaming at various parts. Yet I know that you jumped both feet into each of those ventures. That
Yes.
when you were working as a marketing professional, you were all in on doing marketing. When you were working as a
Mhm.
counseling professional, you were all in counseling. We didn't say
Mhm.
this, but Sarah also trains seeing eye dogs, and she's all in training seeing eye dogs. And there's an interesting thing. She trains dogs to help the blind see, and then she does visual stuff. And so there's some
That's so
interesting
very
parallels there.
interesting.
So
Well, and
we'll have to
Jonathan,
go
gonna
ahead.
add 2 things
I've
that
got a chance
stuck
to let
out.
that happen.
Oh, you're good. There's just 2 things that stuck out to me as you were recapping is I have never had a degree in graphic design.
Right.
Nothing. So, self-taught. But and then the only other thing is I would say because I mean, I've talked with students at different events, and sometimes it's really easy to shrug off or almost be ashamed of like, yeah, I'm at Starbucks. Yeah, I'm working this kind of random job at Chick-fil-A. Like eyes divert. It's like I don't know how to talk about it. I feel bad about myself. Please don't say it. And for me, what that temptation was I've mentioned it before, but I nannied. And that was also it sounds really funny, but you try to teach kids how to clarify what they're trying to say to you. Oh, so I put in hours upon hours upon hours of conversations with kids that you would be like, you're just going to swim practice. You're just going to Target. You just tried to get a kid not to smash something in the grocery store. But all those things at a job that you could just really overlook. You know what's really wild? So one of my other clients, his name's Justin Early. He has 3 books out now. I got to do the interior graphics of his latest one that got published through Zondervan. And I got him as a client because I babysat for them for 3 years. And he walked by my computer one time when I was over and he saw me doing one of your slide decks and he went, "What is that?" And I was like, "Oh, I do graphic design on the side." And now it looks like I have this swanky connection. And it's like, no, I just steadily, faithfully watched his boys for 3 years and
Yeah.
happened to be developing this skill at the same time. So just for the students too, that might be like, I'm not doing anything significant. You never know. You really don't know.
Yeah, we might just take the shortcut there and say you were being extraordinary at ordinary things, and then see what
Hey.
Hey, that was too
and
easy. Wow.
see what came out of that. Well, Sarah, thanks for sharing the story and thanks for going there. We'll definitely have some follow up conversations. Definitely check out inclivity.com to see Sarah's work. But if you really want to experience Sarah's work, what you really ought to do is you ought to buy the Personal Triangle book, and then you'll be able to
Mm,
personally experience and own some of Sarah's work. Or you should
yeah.
be ready to buy our upcoming Team Triangle book, which is about to be published, which Sarah also has designed and illustrated. If you want to get your hands on it and be able to actually hold a piece of Sarah's design work.
Mhm.
Sarah, as we finish out, I was thinking about we were talking about the guide dogs, but we were at the Smoky Mountains. We had gotten there
Mhm.
early, and Sarah, you had come in early, and I can't remember the reasons for all that. We were staying at a Hampton Inn outside
Oh
of
my gosh, this
I
story.
call it the Redneck Disney World, which
It
is
is
yeah, whatever that town is down
Pigeon
in the
Forge.
Smoky Mountains. That's right, Pigeon Forge. And we were there, and Sarah it comes down early to get breakfast, Hampton Inn, stay there because
Mhm.
of free breakfast, of course. And she has a guide dog with her that she's training
Mhm.
that has a guide dog vest. And she has
Mhm.
a very interesting interaction with a very nice lady who was staying at the hotel. And so Sarah, as our going out story, share that story because it was a fun one. So
Oh, it was so much fun. Yeah, no, we're at this hotel and it's like 6 a.m. and I was like, no one's gonna be down in this Hampton Inn dining area at 6 a.m. This is gonna be fine. I'm gonna be able to take the dog, get coffee, look like a hot, sleep deprived mess that I am. This is gonna be fine. I get down there and the room is packed. It's totally packed. It was like youth
because
group.
Pigeon Forge is full of old people who get up really early in the morning to take advantage of all the things that go on there. So yeah, all the senior citizens are up early in
It's
Pigeon Forge
crazy.
Hampton Inn. Yeah. So
And there was like a youth group. There was all these teens, and I was like, "What is happening?" So the only seat, there was this long, like almost bar stool height table in the center, and I'm like, "This is the only place I can sit." So much for my just being inconspicuous. And so I go over. I've got it was a Yugo was the pup at the time, and he was doing great. He was fine. And I've got coffee. I'm on my phone just trying, and I can feel all the eyes. Like it's typical. It's typical. And there's a lady at the next table. She has her hairnet on. She doesn't care. She's just getting her breakfast. And I can see her like looking down, look down, look down. And then finally she like throws her fork on the table. And she goes, "What is wrong with you?" And I was like, "What?" And she goes, "You ain't blind, you." And she like does the scrolling motion. And I was like, "Oh no, ma'am. No, ma'am. He's in training." And she goes, "Oh, good. I was confused." And she just put back to eating. A few minutes later, her husband comes by and she goes, she's just like all reassured. She's like, "Don't worry, honey. She's not blind. She just dog in the tree." And I was like, everybody knows. Everybody knows.
so
So
this
good
is
stuff.
so you can see. I want you to tell a story because there's an interesting genesis moment that Sarah may not even have admitted here. Right? There was a visual problem. There was a visual jarring problem. Sarah's clearly using her phone and looking around with eyeballs at work. With a guide dog that's wearing a vest that says a sting eye dog, right? And so
Yep.
Sarah's job in life now is to fix these visual problems. But there was
Yes.
also some counseling required because the lady really wanted to know what was wrong with you.
She didn't hold
So,
back.
yeah, what is wrong with you? So well, to
Once.
some
Oh.
extent, we've been asking that question about Sarah ever since, and it has led to this particular podcast episode. So, Sarah, thank you. I'm always just thrilled with the kind of awesome work you do, and certainly always delighted when we get to work with you, and I'm bound for that. But more than that, we just had so many great conversations over the years, untangling different
Mhm.
things, tangling up others, and learning together. And so, thanks for your time, and thanks for being on the Be Unbound podcast. It was an honor to have you. Well, David, that was a fun conversation. And as per kind of usual, when the cameras stopped rolling, things got even more crazy. We mentioned it at the beginning of our conversation that we had some technical difficulties, which is an understatement. We've never had technical difficulties that carried into day two and getting this done. And then at the end, we were waiting for Sarah's files to upload. And then we got fireworks, we got balloons, which just so you all know, on the podcast service that we use to record this, we've never had fireworks and balloons. So even at the end, Sarah was pulling off some interesting graphic design things. She swears she didn't do anything, but we both been sitting there going, we never saw fireworks and balloons before. So it was an interesting conversation and with a bang, even off camera. So
Just dumbfoundingly so. I still have no idea how in the world that happened. And with as good a timing as it happened too. Because there was 30 seconds after her recording finished uploading, and then she was like, "Oh, my upload's done." Fireworks. I got nothing.
it was for those of you that we pull the curtains back and show what a well-oiled professional, never surprised team we are. This started with David going, "I'm sure it'll work," which is exactly what you want your technical IT person to say because we were on like plan I don't know G or H in terms of
Yeah,
trying to get everything to
whenever I
work.
say that, I'm just kind of reaching over to the nearest wood surface and just like rapidly knocking on it.
So we did record the podcast that you just heard, and at the end we weren't sure if it was actually going to work, and so then it did upload. And I assume if you're listening to this, then the whole thing was successful. So anyhow, Sarah's always a fun conversation. Her story at the end, I was sharing with her that every time I'm in Hampton Inn and I see, or if I see somebody with a seeing eye dog, I remember that lady looking at Sarah and saying, "What is wrong with you?" So lots of interesting stuff there, and I think such an interesting story in terms of Sarah's background, how she got to where she is, and the way each thing that she's done along the way has really been a major factor in the kind of graphic designer. And really, I don't know, graphic designer is not a good descriptive for it. It's almost more if she's a graphic consultant and what she does, which I think is really exciting. So anyhow, David, your thoughts?
Yeah, yeah. So many interesting things that you can pull from a conversation with Sarah, and not only this one, but pretty much every time that I've had a conversation with her, there's always something interesting to be taken from it. But this one, what I remember, she made a statement very early on into the podcast where she said that when she first got tendonitis in her hand, she said, "I had bad theology at the time, and I thought that that was God telling me that I should give up on art, and this was not the direction that I should head." And I think that really ties in a lot into something that we talk a lot about in Unbound, which is the fact that failure is an option. And by failing well, it's one of the most beneficial things that you can do to understand how the direction that God is pushing you in, but also just to be able to grow and learn from experiences and be equipped for whatever God has for you in the future. Because I think Sarah's story is an excellent example of the fact that you really never know where God is going to take you in life. And so learning from those failures effectively and failing well. And I think that in a lot of ways, Sarah's journey has not been filled with failure near as much as I think that she might make it out to be. But I think that she's got a lot of really cool experiences that have really informed that. So,
Yeah, and that's an interesting note because if you look from the outside, it looks like she's really wildly successful, and she is in very many ways. But if you hear her tell the story, she got to that success by a bunch of failures that I think were personally pretty hard at the time. I mean,
mhm,
she talks openly about tendonitis, made her think that her dreams had to be. I think that where she put in the attic, words she used were put in the attic. She had to put her
mhm.
dreams in the attic, and I think that there was some frustration when she spent a lot of time getting a degree, and then found that the way that she was using that degree, she didn't think was actually helping people the way she wanted to help people. And so, but yet those things ended up being major factors in the kind of, I think, extraordinary work that she does now. So, well, thank you once again for listening to the Be Unbound podcast. We hope you enjoyed Sarah as much as we enjoyed talking to her. And we probably will bring her back because there's so many different things. There's some really deep stuff that Sarah's thought about that we kind of use this as an intro podcast, but would love to kind of dive a little deeper with her on some things. And hopefully we'll get a chance to do that in the future. We were talking in the conversation that if you want to see some of Sarah's work, you should check out our book, The Personal Triangle, and our upcoming book about the Team Triangle. They are short reads with a lot of illustrations on purpose for all the reasons we talked about in the podcast, and a way for you to sort of see some of the ideas that are driving forces inside of Unbound. And if you're interested in Unbound, go to beunbound.us, and there you can learn about our Navigate course, which we referenced in the conversation about decision making. We did have a wonderful class last night with a really great group of students that were a lot of fun. You can learn about our high school programs, Declare, which is a program that we do working with My Father's World. So if you're looking for a homeschool curriculum and you need some extra coaching with that, check out Declare. Equip, which takes whatever homeschool curriculum you're using in high school and helps your students actualize and apply their education, whatever they're learning. We help them be able to apply it in a practical fashion. And then our flagship program, which is Ascend, which is our program for students post high school and is designed, uniquely designed, we might say, to teach students how to thrive. And we do that through a variety of ways, including live events, skills-based learning, and project-based education. And if those things sound intriguing, but you don't quite understand what they are or mean, well, that's by design. We want you to go to our website, which has great visuals on it, some of which inspired or worked on by Sarah, and check it out and learn about them there. Thank you so much for listening to the Be Unbound podcast. And until next time, we hope that you will be unbound.